Hi, and so I'm just breaking up the video. I'm going to go ahead and go on with number 6 in this. I suppose I should share my screen. If I can figure out how to do that. Here we go. So we're now in the idea of these are kind of these illicit contrary, illicit subcontrary, illicit subalteration. And let's just go through some of these. So the idea here is if you have a statement like all baseball players are designated hitters, therefore it is false that no baseball players are designated hitters. The idea here is does this fall into, this is an A over to an E statement. So the idea there is you're talking about the contrary relationship. And what happens is does this or does this not commit that contrary relationship? We know that if A is true, it's false that E is true. So this is a deductively valid from an Aristotelian, and this is true because it does not commit a formal fallacy. Because it works, it doesn't commit a fallacy. But as we come along, we get some pickup trucks are off-road vehicles. So that is an I statement. And so we then have to ask, we go over to some pickups are not off-road. Well, we come back up here to our square of opposition. We have an I to know. We know that subcontrary means that they both can't be false, but one can be true and one can be false. So this is saying because this one is true that the other one is false. Well, we know that if one is true, the other one could be true. But we only know really anything about the other one if one of them is false. If one of them is true, the other one could be anything. So this is a deductively invalid argument. This doesn't follow from that argument. That conclusion cannot be reached from that premise. And the reason is because it's trying to show this relationship, this subcontrary relationship, is illicit. And so it's an illicit contrary. Basically what you're doing is you're wanting to look at these, you're saying, no inkjet printers are high resolution, therefore it's false that all are high resolution. So what we're doing here is we're looking at that's an E and an A statement. You just label those as E and A. And we know the relationship between those is contrary. And we know that both cannot be true, but they both can be false. So if the first one's false, it's possible the other one's false. It's also possible the other one's not false. So we know that relationship, this conclusion doesn't follow. This can't follow from the other one because we know they can both be false. We know one can be false, one can be true, but we know they both can't be true. So if the first one's false, if the premise is one's false, we really can't draw any inference about the other EI, AEI. So we're looking at that contrary relationship. We find that this doesn't follow, and we find the reason is it's admitting a fallacy of illicit contrary. So what you're going to look at is, is this an A, E, I, or O statement? And is the other one A, E, I, O? So then you know what relationship we're trying to judge. We see if it follows. If it follows, it's valid. And if it doesn't follow, it's invalid. And if it's invalid, we then call it a illicit operation. It's committing a formal fallacy. It's trying to show some relationship there that isn't actually there. Now, the existential fallacy is the idea that the Aristotelian logic makes an assumption that when you make categorical statement like all dogs are canines, you're making claims about things that actually exist. But we all know that sometimes there are things we talk about. As I'm making this, it's Halloween time. It's a few weeks off, but it's that season of the year. And we talk about ghosts and ghouls and zombies and all kinds of fun stuff, right? And so the idea there is I can say like all zombies are creatures that like to eat brains, okay? And all of us know that to be perhaps a true categorical statement. If you know anything about zombies, you know that's what they eat. They like it. That's what they spend their days trying to eat is brains. Or vampires like to suck the blood. Vampires can only come out at night, things like that. And so what happens is these are kind of acceptable rules. But we also know that vampires, ghosts, goblins and other things, werewolves. These things don't really exist. Therefore, when we make these claims about them, we are talking about things that aren't really real. And so what happens is we're talking about things that aren't really real. And so we need to keep in mind that in that case, if you follow something to an inference from like a statement like all vampires are creatures that suck blood, or are creatures that can't come out in the sunlight, and then we take that and we say, therefore, some vampires exist, that there exists something called a vampire. Some vampires are creatures that can't come out during the day. Then we're making an existential claim, and that's an existential fallacy. So if the thing isn't really real, we're committing an existential fallacy. What we're going to do is we're going to move on to what's called the modern square of opposition. And what the modern square of opposition does is it basically says, hey, let's drop this whole concept of making an existential assumption that these things exist and just assume they don't. And so when you talk about things that you don't know if they exist or not, or if they don't exist, you're very limited in the inferences you can make. But we'll do that later. So what happens here is we start with a thing like, it is false that some meteorites are not iron, nickel, metal fragments. So that's a false O statement, and therefore it is false that no meteorites are iron, nickel, metal magnets. So the immediate makes is based upon the concept of subalteration. It's at the side of your, it's going from O up to E. And so it's making a claim about subalteration. The subject term in these category propositions denote something that exists. Does it exist or does it not? Well, meteorites exist. There's no question that those are real objects. So we can say it does exist. And does this commit a fallacy of existential fallacy? Well, they exist and the subalteration works, so it's not committing any kind of existential fallacy. What we need to do is we need to find, like, ethics textbooks exist, but we will find that things like, like this here is something that doesn't exist. And so therefore, if we say like, like this is talking about going from, this is an E statement going up to this is an I statement going up to an E statement, so I up to E, and that would be talking about the contradictory relationship. But the thing that we're talking about does not exist. These things don't actually exist. My kids are here, so I'm just not going to say it. And then, so argument 3 does commit the existential fallacy because, or does not commit the existential fallacy. It does not, and the reason it does not commit it is because it's making a claim about something existing that doesn't exist, and therefore it's not going out and then creating something existent. So when you go up from an E or an I, if the premise isn't, not E or I, an I or an O, then you're not making an existential claim. It's only when you're start with an A or an E statement that it makes an existential claim. I assume that these are things that don't exist. Therefore, we're talking about, so I can show you here. In this case, the existence of some of these being false is talking about that sub-contrary relationship. So in that case, it is actually committing an existential fallacy. And the reason it's making that existential fallacy is because it's making an assumption that something does exist in order to make that inference. There's quite a few of these. If you miss one, you can go back and correct it. It'll tell you why you missed it, and that should help you. If you have questions about that, I can explain that more. I don't want to go through every answer, although if you get them wrong, it will give you different questions. So I could go through some of these, but I don't want to go through all of them just because I think that's a bit much. All right. So this one is asking about conditionally and unconditionally valid forms. So in some cases, so what happens is it is false that some non-L are non-Z. So this is making a claim that a I statement is making a statement that the I is false. Therefore, it's false that all non-L are non-Z. So we're going from I up to A. We're going straight up, which is subalteration. Falsity goes up. So that depends upon the subalteration relationship. And therefore, it is unconditionally, it is conditionally valid. Oh, okay. So in this case, it's conditionally valid. It's conditioned upon these things actually existing. In this case, we have this thing like non-L or non-Z. We don't know if these things exist or not. Therefore, that relationship, that subalteration relationship, really depends upon us knowing that these things actually exist. Since we don't know that they exist, we're kind of conditioned upon that being the case. So let's do a few more. So here it's false that non-T or non-B, all non-T or non-B. So we don't know what it is. This is an A statement, and then we're going to go down to a O statement. It's a contradictory. But what we do know is that would be a contradictory. And then the question is this unconditionally or conditionally valid? Well, what we'll find is if we have the modern square of opposition, the modern square allows us to, really the only thing in the modern square is that contradiction. So in that case, that's unconditionally true. If it's false that all of something are not something, then it's true that some are. That is unconditionally valid, even if it is talking about something, because in this case, it's not committing that fallacy. So here it's relying upon, it's false that some are not. So that's an O statement. Going over to an I statement, that's the bottom. That's a subalteration. I'm sorry, not subcontrary. And it's false, therefore the other one has to be true, relies upon them existing to make that claim, therefore it's conditionally valid. And that's the way that works, is you're looking for the relationship that we're talking about there, and then we're asking whether or not it follows because of that, or whether or not an existential assumption is basically being made, whether it's conditionally valid or unconditionally valid. If the modern square allows it, it's unconditionally. If the modern square doesn't, it's conditionally valid. All right. So let's see. So in this one, it is false that some U are non-A. So this one I should take out. So you can just guess on this one. This one was a mistake. I didn't realize this was in here. So I need to remove that. And then finally, it just gives you true, false. I'm not going to go over that because I think that's something you should do. So if you have any questions, send me an email.